Iran, a name that echoes in the news, on lips, and across nations. But beyond the headlines, beyond the politics, beyond the confusion, there lies a hidden thread, woven quietly through the tapestry of Scripture. Have you ever paused long enough to ask yourself, what does this land truly represent in the eyes of God? Because this is not just about a country. It's about prophecy. It's about purpose. And it's about the divine fingerprints of God that rest on the pages of history and continue to shape the destiny of the world. What if I told you that this nation is not just a background character in biblical history? What if I told you that it was used, not once, but multiple times, as an instrument in the unfolding of God's will? Not by coincidence, but by divine orchestration. And that the same power still breathes relevance into our lives today. You see, many read the Bible like a storybook, skimming past unfamiliar names of places, nations, and kings. But those names, they're not decorations. They are keys. Hidden keys. And if you miss them, you miss part of the revelation. This journey is not about political opinions. This is a call to awaken your spirit. To open your eyes to what has been there all along. Because when you understand the divine purpose behind this nation, when you see how it connects to prophecy, obedience, restoration, and judgment, you'll never read the Bible the same again. Stay with me, because by the end of this video, you will not only understand the role of this nation in Scripture, you will also see where we are in God's timeline, and what that means for you as His chosen vessel in these final days. The hidden truth about Iran in the Bible they never told you. Section 1, Persia in Prophecy. Long before the rise of empires and kingdoms that shaped the ancient world, God's plan was already unfolding beyond the borders of Israel. This is a fundamental truth that challenges many assumptions. God's sovereignty transcends human limitations, and His purposes stretch far beyond the confines of a single nation or people group. Persia, known today as Iran, was a kingdom often viewed as foreign, distant, and even opposed to Israel. Yet, through divine orchestration, Persia became an instrument in God's hands to fulfill a sacred promise. The king of this empire, Cyrus the Great, did not grow up in the faith or covenant of Israel. He was not chosen because of his heritage or religious background. Instead, God moved sovereignly to raise him up for a unique and divine purpose. When God refers to Cyrus as His anointed, in Isaiah 45 verse 1, it is a declaration that breaks all conventional boundaries. The title, anointed, was traditionally reserved for God's chosen leaders within Israel, kings and priests consecrated for holy service. To call a foreign king His anointed reveals that God's work is not limited by human divisions or religious affiliations. It shows that God's will can manifest powerfully through those outside the covenant, even before they fully understand Him. This divine selection was not random or incidental. Cyrus was called to restore what had been lost, the temple in Jerusalem, the very center of Israel's worship and identity. The decree he issued, recorded in Ezra 1 verses 1-2, confirms that God's authority and hand were upon him. Though Cyrus may not have known God intimately, he recognized a power greater than himself. His proclamation was not a mere political statement but a fulfillment of God's promise to His people. This moment is further affirmed in 2 Chronicles 36 verses 22-23, where the fulfillment of Jeremiah's prophecy is celebrated through Persia's actions. God had spoken through His prophets about the restoration of His people, and now His word was coming to pass through a foreign kingdom. Reflecting on this reveals a profound lesson: God's purposes are not confined by the familiar. He does not need our approval or understanding to move. The divine plan often unfolds through unexpected channels, challenging us to broaden our perspective on how God operates. Today, many expect God's intervention only within their own communities or through people who share their faith or background. But the example of Persia reminds us that God's work is global and his methods diverse. He raises leaders and stirs nations, even those outside our expectations, to carry out his will. This truth calls us to humility and openness. It asks us to recognize that God's sovereignty extends beyond what we see or understand. His plans are unfolding continually, through people and places we might not anticipate. Could it be that nations and leaders we overlook are instruments in God's hands for his divine purpose? But what if this is only the beginning of a far greater story, one that stretches across time and nations? A story where God's hand moves in ways we have yet to recognize, through forces and places we never imagined. What if the role Persia played in ancient times is still unfolding today in ways that will shake the very foundations of what we think we know? Section 2, The Ram and the Goat. There are moments in Scripture where the veil is lifted, and suddenly we are not just reading a story, we are encountering divine intelligence. Daniel's vision of the ram and the goat is not simply a record of kingdoms rising and falling. It is a prophetic message from heaven, a blueprint of how empires clash, how spiritual forces wrestle, and how God's sovereign timeline unfolds, without error. What many don't realize is that Iran's role in global affairs today, its tensions, its strategies, even its spiritual climate, was not birthed in recent years. It was first spoken in a dream to a prophet kneeling in Babylon. It was revealed to Daniel not as a vague image but as a war between two beasts, one that symbolized the rise of Persia, and the other that came furiously against it with supernatural speed. Daniel begins with the vision of the ram, standing by the river. In Daniel 8 verses 3-4, he writes, "Then I lifted up mine eyes, and saw a ram which had two horns, one was higher than the other, and the higher came up last. I saw the ram pushing westward, and northward, and southward, so that no beast might stand before him, and became great." This ram, the angel later explains in Daniel 8 verse 20, represents the kings of Media and Persia, today known as Iran. The two horns are symbolic. Media came first, but Persia rose higher, just as the vision described. Persia expanded swiftly and powerfully, asserting influence in every direction. No kingdom could withstand it for a time. No beast could resist it. Persia became great, but not forever. Then suddenly, another figure appears in the vision, a goat. Daniel 8 verses 5-7 continues, "And as I was considering, behold, an he-goat came from the west on the face of the whole earth, and touched not the ground, and the goat had a notable horn between his eyes. And he came to the ram that had two horns, and ran unto him in the fury of his power. The goat came from the west, not slowly, but with supernatural speed, so swift that its feet barely touched the ground." This was not just a military threat. It was a divine assignment to confront and overthrow a power that had become great in its own eyes. The goat charged at the ram with fury. The collision was violent. The ram was broken. Its horns, symbols of dominion and strength, were shattered. This vision is not just a record of two empires, it is a spiritual revelation of how God manages the destinies of nations. He lifts up one kingdom, and in his appointed time, he brings in another. Not by human might. Not by military genius. But by divine decree. Even more striking is what's revealed later in Daniel 10 verse 13, where an angel speaks to Daniel, saying, "But the prince of the kingdom of Persia withstood me 21 days, but, lo, Michael, one of the chief princes, came to help me." What does this mean? That while Persia had power on earth, it was also guarded, or manipulated, by spiritual forces in heavenly realms. The Prince of Persia was not a king in the palace. It was a ruling spiritual power in the atmosphere, an invisible principality resisting divine messages, resisting angelic movement. Behind the glory of Persia, there was conflict. Behind the strength of its horn, there was darkness. Behind every throne, there was warfare. And while Daniel fasted and sought understanding, angels were battling in the heavens to bring him that revelation. This is not ancient history. This is prophetic architecture. Because what we see in today's world, especially with nations like Iran, is not simply geopolitical friction. It is the manifestation of age-old spiritual contention. The same principalities, the same heavenly battlegrounds, and the same patterns still move quietly behind modern curtains. And so the question echoes through time: are we aware that behind every earthly system is a spiritual kingdom battling for control? This vision was never about fear. It's about discernment. If you're finding this message helpful and resonating with you, please consider liking this video and subscribing to our channel. Your support helps us continue sharing valuable insights with the community. Also, once you're done watching, we'd love to hear your thoughts. Drop them in the comments section below. And if you're still watching, this next part is for your spiritual growth, don't miss it. Section 3, a Jewish heroine in Iran's royal palace. Imagine for a moment the vastness of God's divine orchestration, how every step, every place, every circumstance is woven into a tapestry only He fully understands. Iran, known to many as a distant land shrouded in mystery and conflict, was not simply a backdrop for history's page. No, it was the very stage God chose for His plan of preservation to unfold. It was there, in the heart of a mighty empire, that God positioned a woman, a Jewish heroine, whose courage would alter the destiny of a people. Esther's story is not merely a tale of palace intrigue or royal favor. It is a profound declaration that God's providence transcends borders and challenges. Though hidden in a foreign land, Esther was no accident, no mere refugee lost in exile. She was chosen, elevated, and placed by God's hand for such a time as this. Every detail, every moment of her journey, bore the weight of divine purpose. Consider the magnitude of this truth. A young Jewish woman, taken from her people and set within the Persian royal palace, stood as the silent hope of her nation. Through her favor with the king, through the quiet strength that came from her faith, Esther became the instrument of deliverance for countless lives. The very land that might have been seen as hostile or unwelcoming was transformed into sacred ground where salvation was birthed. And this leads us to the heart of the matter. What if your current location, your present circumstances, your very situation is not by chance but by divine design? What if the trials you face, the place you find yourself, are God's chosen ground for your breakthrough? Just as Esther was placed in the palace for the survival of her people, you too may be where God has placed you to become a bearer of His deliverance. This is not merely historical reflection, it is a revelation that shakes the foundations of how we see our struggles and surroundings. The enemy may intend harm, but God turns it for good. The territories that seem hostile, the environments that feel like exile, can become the very places where God's glory is revealed through your obedience and courage. Within the walls of that Persian Empire, God's people were preserved, and their story did not end in captivity but in victory. Your testimony could be birthed in the heart of your own Persia. That place of challenge or confinement where God is working behind the scenes. Your enemy's territory can be your throne room of transformation. Beloved, if you feel hidden, displaced, or out of place, know this: God has not forgotten you. Like Esther, you are divinely positioned for such a time as this. The moment you are living in right now may carry the weight of generations yet to come. Step into your calling with faith, knowing that the hand of God is upon you, shaping history through your obedience and trust. Section 4. Shadows of Prophecy. The days we live in carry whispers of ancient words, words spoken through prophets long ago, yet echoing with undeniable clarity into our present moment. When we open the scrolls of Ezekiel, we meet Persia, a name that stirs the dust of history but also breathes life into prophecy that is still unfolding before our eyes. Persia, known to us now as Iran, is not merely a distant land caught in earthly conflicts. It is a shadow cast upon the tapestry of the end times, a vital thread woven into the divine narrative that the Spirit reveals to those who seek with open hearts. Imagine the scene the prophet Ezekiel paints, a vast coalition rising, a formidable army gathering under the banner of ancient alliances. Persia stands alongside nations like Gog and Magog, forces that surge forward not by chance, but by the sovereign design that moves unseen by human eyes. The scriptures say, Persia, Cush, and Put will be with them, a clear sign that this region remains a key player in the spiritual theater preparing the final acts of history. This is no mere geopolitical speculation. This is a call to awaken, a stirring to the Spirit, to understand that what unfolds in those lands is part of a divine orchestration. We are reminded again by the words of Jesus in Matthew, "You will hear of wars and rumors of wars." These are not words to sow fear but to kindle readiness. Each whisper of conflict, each rumble along distant borders, is a drumbeat signaling that the shaking of the nations is underway. The drying of the Euphrates, described in Revelation, symbolizes the way being prepared for the kings of the East, a moment when pathways are cleared for the final convergence of forces prophesied from the beginning. But amid this unfolding drama, the greatest question is not about armies or nations, it is about the state of our own hearts. Are we awake to the times? Or do we slumber in complacency, distracted by the noise of the world? The prophecies serve as a mirror, reflecting our spiritual readiness. The shaking is not only external but internal. A call to examine whether our faith is anchored deeply enough, whether our spirits are prepared for the storm that moves closer with each passing day. Iran is more than a headline. It is a signpost on the prophetic road. Yet, the true preparation is not found in political anxiety or human strategies. It is found in surrender, in prayer, and in a heart aligned with the purposes of God. To watch with sober eyes is to walk with humility and courage, knowing that the future is held not in the hands of nations, but in the hands of the Almighty. Section 5. Spiritual Awakening Through Understanding Ancient Truths. When the Spirit moves, it often calls us beyond what we know, beyond the familiar pages and stories we've heard 1,000 times. It beckons us into a sacred discovery, a revelation that stretches the boundaries of our faith and reshapes the very lens through which we see God's plan. This is not merely about knowledge, but about transformation. A spiritual awakening born from encountering truths long hidden, truths that God carefully wove into Scripture about nations far from our own, like Iran. Consider the story of Philip and the Ethiopian eunuch, a man reading the Scriptures, searching, yearning for understanding, for something beyond the surface. Philip approaches and asks a simple yet piercing question, "Do you understand what you are reading?" This question pierces the veil of mere reading and invites us into true comprehension, the kind that ignites our soul and lights a fire within us. It's in this moment of revelation that the eunuch's heart begins to burn, and his life is forever changed. Brothers and sisters, God calls us to walk that same path, to not be content with surface knowledge but to be filled with spiritual wisdom and understanding, that we might live worthy of Him. The Apostle Paul reminds us in Colossians, "It is by being filled with the knowledge of God's will and all spiritual wisdom that our lives become reflections of His glory." This knowledge is not mere intellectual pursuit, it is a deep, heart-transforming encounter that renews our minds and breaks the patterns of this world. Ask yourself now, how open am I to the Spirit's unveiling of deeper truths? Am I willing to let go of comfortable assumptions to embrace the fullness of God's revelation, even when it challenges what I thought I knew? When God reveals His plan for distant nations, it is not to confuse or overwhelm but to awaken us, to expand our faith beyond borders, beyond cultural divides, beyond limited understanding. When we dive into the Word with a heart ready to receive, we find that God's purposes reach across every nation and people. The stories of ancient lands, seemingly remote and unrelated, are threads in the magnificent tapestry of His redemptive plan. They teach us patience, humility, and the vastness of His mercy. We see how He calls all peoples into His kingdom, how every soul matters, and how our faith deepens when we grasp this truth. This awakening is not for knowledge's sake alone. It is to prepare us, to shape our character, to fortify our spirit, and to equip us to walk in His fullness, empowered to love beyond borders and to serve with wisdom that transcends the world's limitations. And so, in conclusion, let this sink deep into your spirit. God used Persia, what we now call Iran, not as a footnote in history, but as a vessel of divine blessing to His people. Not every move of God comes from Jerusalem. Sometimes, it comes from the places we least expect. Sometimes, it comes through a woman who risked everything behind palace walls, and changed the destiny of an entire nation. This is not just history. This is prophecy fulfilled. This is God showing us, again and again, that His hand moves even in foreign lands, even in enemy territories, even in governments we do not understand. He is not confined to borders. He is not limited to what man approves. So don't fear the shaking of nations, fear a heart that's no longer aligned with the will of God. Because when the ground trembles and the systems collapse, the only safe place is in obedience. You see, the truth was never hidden. God never concealed it. We just didn't look with spiritual eyes. We read, but we didn't perceive. We quoted scripture, but we never stopped to wonder why God would choose the unexpected to fulfill His purpose. And now that your eyes are open, you can't unsee it. You can't go back to shallow reading. You can't keep ignoring the thread of His glory running through even the nations we fear. If this word pierced your spirit, if light entered your soul today, don't keep it to yourself. Like this video. Share it with someone who needs it. And subscribe for more revelations that draw you closer to God's heart. And in the comments, write this as a prayer. God, open my eyes to the truth in your word. Because when your eyes are opened, the world can never look the same again.